So Mythic rating in WoW is actually dying, which is kind of crazy. So is WoW? Yeah, no, I'm not exactly sure why this is happening. Like one specific reason, I think there's like 3 or 4 different reasons. But I figured I'd watch this and talk about it a bit. I want a Mythic raid. Yeah, you think that until you do.
You think you do, but you don't.
What's up, guys? Femtor here, and finally the day has come when I finally disagree with Asmongold. No, I'm just kidding. There's always some stuff I don't agree with him 100% of the time. Beginning of the video, I'm gonna tell you what I do agree on. I think he makes a lot of good points throughout this whole video that he reacted to Beldler, but there are some things I didn't agree on, as the title of the video suggests. So that's towards the end of the video. Timestamps will be in the description below. Enjoy the video.
This is not a problem that Blizzard needs to fix, like with split runs or anything like that. This is not an issue at all. Blizzard should not take this seriously in any capacity. Just because people want to make a career out of raiding in their game does not mean that Blizzard is obligated to contrive the game in a way that makes that possible. The truth is that this game is made for wide audiences and for general audiences. And hurting splits and making loot harder to trade to like try to handicap high-end guilds.
I 100% agree on this. Okay? The game should not fix the game around degenerate gameplay. There's absolutely no reason for it. It's a waste of development time. And bro, if you think something is exploitable, like, I mean, look at Last Epoch, for example. Yeah, they release skills. Some of them are just, like, way too strong. And it's like, yeah, we're gonna do balance on the next cycle. Unless it's, like, game-breaking, man, who gives a shit? Like, if people want to be degenerates, let them be degenerates. Like, it's not your job to babysit player behavior. Let's move on to the next point.
This is one of the reasons why I stopped raiding. Is like I would do a boss and then one person would make a mistake and then everybody would die. And I just like this. I'm like, what am I doing with my life? Why am I playing this? Like,
honestly, this is exactly why I stopped doing mythic raiding. It's just not fun. Your life depends on other people not fucking up. That is just not a fun gameplay to me. Now, there's also like, obviously it's not as like cookie cutter as just saying this like, oh, this guy fucked up and now we're all dead. There are some mechanics that, yes, maybe, the tank fucked up, it faced the boss the other way. Sure, I'll give you that. But like a random person just didn't soak something and because of that it blew up and wiped the whole raid. And then the worst part is like the best example of this, and I know they stopped doing this in the game. And the worst example of this, in my opinion, was actually Maiden in Tomb of Sargeras. That was probably like the worst offender of this shit. One person had a bomb, didn't jump into the hole, that's a wipe. One person didn't soak like that whole like mini game where it's like you have the fail and the... What was the other one? It was fail in life, I think. Or the fail in arcane, I don't remember. Orbs that are going through and it's like you have to soak the orbs that fit your color or something like that. Otherwise you get a bomb, and if you do the mistake twice, well, like if you do the mistake again while you have the bomb on you, you explode, basically wipe the whole raid. Right, shit like that. And during that time, you're also taking ticking damage. So like on healers, this would be even like more taxing. Again, the mechanic was fun in theory. In practice, it was garbage, right? So mechanics like this to just wipe the whole raid, completely not fun, completely not needed, and we'll talk more about these problems in mythic raiding again later on in the video, in the disagreement section, let's say it like that. And okay, let's move on to the next point.
WoW players and MMO players in general take pride in overcoming bad design. And their ego is attached to being able to overcome that bad design. So they don't want the game to be easier by making it more readable and easily approachable. And that's why, for example, they try to fight to maintain bad systems in a game, because they had to suffer through the bad systems, so they think that everybody else should as well. So that's also a big issue, is that it's WoW players that have this sense of elitism because they're able to move out of the shiny circle and they don't want anybody else to be able to see the shiny circle more easily. Like, WoW has always been a very easy game in general.
Okay, so yeah, so I agree what he talks about here with the arbitrary difficulty, that, you know, you're taking pride in beating is like red circle on red floor with a red debuff on top of your character, right? With a red signal over your head, and it's like, yeah, good job, you can beat it. This is not something to be like proud of or anything like that. This is like, it doesn't mean much, right? Let alone, honestly, beating a video game doesn't really mean much unless you're like at the pro level and like you're discovering new shit, or like you're doing like speed runs, whatever, which is like, well, this is not WoW, World of Warcraft. Unless you're doing any of that, bro, like, no one cares. Stop holding it at such a high regard, right? You're not a better person because you can do something that another person can't in a video game. This doesn't really matter. And a lot of people who have complaints that's like, oh no, you're making this content too easy now, and da-da-da. It's like, who are you gatekeeping? Now, I agree, there is room for difficult gameplay, and you can throw it into WoW. We're going to talk about that again more in a later section. There is room for that, but this should not be the key or like the main content of the game. And yes, raiding is a main content of the game. Raiding, currently Mythic Plus, and PvP are main contents of the game, and they should be a lot more accessible, including the harder difficulties.
To be social interaction. Like, you have to have social interaction in raids. Like, that's why, like, whenever they made personal loot mandatory, I was like, raiding is dead. This is just like the people that are making raid, they don't understand, like, what is this? I want to kill a massive dragon with a 40-man army? Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so with this one, I kind of agree, I kind of don't really agree. I mean, I agree to an extent. I agree, especially with the last point. I want to have a 40-man army killing a dragon. Shit, why stop at 40? Go for 100 people. Who cares? Like, imagine this scenario, and this is going to be like super fucking geeky. Imagine this scenario. You have a whole army going against this massive enemy. Now, ideally, you also see this enemy from, like, let's say you're in the main hub of the city, and you see this gigantic creature walking around the world, right? And you need a whole army of players to go and beat it. And this guy only spawns every so often and takes a long time to kill it and all that shit, so people will always have time to join in. But it doesn't just, like, kill you outright, kill everyone. It will kill some people, you know, maybe at random, whatever, but it's like you can always come back and keep piling up on him. Because if you think about it, you send 100 people army against a dragon, some people are gonna die, and that's a good thing. Okay? So, on that point, I'll agree. The other point, though, social interaction in raid, honestly, dude, if you're like, because he's advocating for 40 men later, and dude, I honestly don't think loot, like personal loot versus, you know, was even called, like when you can vote on the loot and having a loot master is a social interaction. A lot of times it's a scummy interaction, if anything. The social interaction in a raid, honestly, is just conversing with other people. I don't think loot plays much of a role for social interactions, right? I understand from his point of view when it's like a guild and you are picking and choosing which person needs to get the gear first so we will have an easier time to raid. That's a different thing, okay? But like if you're doing a pug, and let's be real, I think majority people are pugging, right? I don't think that matters. However, I would agree that with that, when they made personal loot mandatory, that was a mistake. In my opinion, it should be a choice of the players. I don't know why they removed player agency. However, if a guild wants to run master loot, if a guild wants to run personal loot, if a guild wants to run whatever the voting thing is, forgot the name, they should be allowed to. It's their choice. Like, I don't understand why they had to change that. That, in my opinion, is stupid, this thing. And by the way, my opinion on loot right now, personal loot, actually was more beneficial for more players than loot rolling. You are more likely to get loot. Like, by 8% or some shit. I did the math in the video, like, over a year ago. But it's like, you are more likely to get loot with personal loot. That's just how it is.
The problem is that
Classes should have their own cool buffs. That's what makes the game fun. They just shouldn't be massive. Like, yeah, what are we talking about? Like, warriors have battle shout, shamans have totems.
Yes, I agree. Classes should have their own cool buffs that they bring to the group. However, I don't see a reason for these buffs not to overlap. Blessing of Kings and Heart of the Wild was a good example. Now you can choose. You want to bring a paladin, you want to bring a druid. Depending on the encounter, depending on this. Maybe you can bring both, but they don't both give you the same buff. They don't both give you the buff at the same time. One of them is going to be on, the other one won't, because it's the same exact buff. I believe, technically, Mark of the Wild was actually better, but correct me if I'm wrong. I don't remember. It's been a while. Okay, I don't really play Classic because yeah. But like for example, I don't think these class buffs should be unique. I believe maybe tanks should give a specific buff. I believe certain melee DPS should bring a specific buff. I believe certain casters should bring a certain buff, or even mix and match, right? So if you want to go based on class rather than based on spec, then in my opinion, Assassination, Rogue, and Hunter can both increase critical strike rate. Just examples, right? Can both increase critical strike rate of what's it called? On the target, right? 3%, 5%, whatever you want, right? Enhancement, like Shaman and Warrior can both bring something like the Shout. Because what is a Shout? It's a morale booster. You can put in a totem that improves morale, right? For example, like, oh, it makes me feel so much better about myself, power of positivity and all that. Okay, Demonology and what's it called? And Demon Hunters can increase magic damage via a curse or whatever demon power that they're using, increase magic damage on the target, right? Like, you can mix and match these priests and, I don't know, paladins technically have a very similar background. They can put in something there, right? Druids and mages, one can be an astral, one can be a magical attunement kind of thing that increases magic damage, right?
Magic. Motherfucker.
Like, you can always mix and match to reduce the amount of classes you need in a raid, which we would talk about later when we talk about the 20-man versus 40-man compositions and my opinions on it, and that is the disagreeing section, so look forward to that. Anyways, that's pretty much my point on that. I think unique buffs are great, so I agree. However, I don't think they need to be completely unique where only one class can bring something of the sort.
Like, there are levels of complexity in the game that don't need to exist, and they don't really make the game better. Like, for example, Polymorph and Hex being two separate spells and different types of a CC, this doesn't make the game better. It's just stupid. Why does it exist? Why? Why are we doing this? Like, it's been like this for years. It's the same with, like, Sap, Incapacitate. What's really the difference here? Are people saying CC is LTAG? The CC in WoW is fucking horrible. The reason why people say CC is good is because it allows good players to show off how good they are at the game. But the reality is that it's not fun to play against and it's not enjoyable. It's the same reason why I said they should remove tanks from Arena. Because I've never done an Arena and fought against a tank and enjoyed the game. So just get rid of it. Problem solved.
Okay, there's a few get rid of it, problem solved. Okay, a few things that to unpack here. Diminishing Returns needs a rework. I honestly agree, and more so the spell Bloat. Now, the point that allows for outplay potential and all that stuff, it doesn't matter. If it's not fun to play around, and also forget not even fun to play around, it's not fun to get into PvP as a new player. It's like the learning curve is just so massive. A stun is a stun, a fear is a fear. A sap is like whatever he said, right? Let me give you an example here, right? Where is it? Here's a list of all the CCs in the game. Okay, this is World of Warcraft. Look at the amount of CCs. Look at this. Does this make sense? Look at this shit. Now, technically, yeah, a lot of them, but like, look at all the categories, okay? Categories, forget like the amount of spells. Look at the categories. Confusion, controlled root, controlled stun, war stomp, which is part of controlled stun, I guess, disarm, disorient, fear, horror, random stun, silence, none that have no diminishing returns, do not show diminishing returns with any other ability, but do have self-diminishing returns, great, and other. What is this? Imagine a new player goes into arena and it's like he finally like, okay, I understand what a druid does now because of in the shuffle I faced this druid 3 times and he only faced like, let's say, a feral druid. Bro, he's gonna meet like a healer druid. He's gonna have a whole other beast to deal with. And then it's like, what if the next match he doesn't even see a druid, right? He's gonna see a mage and a rogue and doesn't even get to play the game. This is dog shit. I'm sorry. In terms of design, in terms of like, yes, outplay and showing your skill and all that stuff, okay, that's great. But the whole point is like, this is not... WoW is not a professional PvP game, right? Like, look, if they did what BDO did, and I really suggest they don't, and make like a whole separate game of BDO that uses BDOS and stuff like that, and it's pure for PvP, and it fails completely, this would be why. Okay, no one wants this. I mean, obviously, like, yeah, the top players, people who have the ego, it's like, oh, well, it took so long to master this, fuck the noobs, now I get to be the pro. Aside from those guys, bro, this is garbage. I'm sorry. I never want to get into PvP because it revolves around, like, people call it setup, but bro, even you face just like a heavy you face a heavy CC comp, it's not even about setup. It's about rotating CCs, and like eventually you'll get a setup, right? You don't have to like be a professional, like professional at setting up. It's because the amount of CC you have on your composition is a natural setup. Oh, well then just LOS again. Talk to people who are brand new players that have to go through this information and tell me how long it would take them to understand. If it takes too long, and by too long I mean over a month of understanding this, they will not play PvP. PvP is way too fucking complex. Now, Arcane Torrent, I believe, doesn't do silence anymore. It removes buffs at this point, but like this... Also, by the way, how are these not on a DR, by the way? Like, I don't get it. Warrior Charge is not on a diminishing... I mean, it is between sub, but like, doesn't it immobilize? Or like have a mini stun? Why isn't that part of the stun? Like, you see what I mean? Or it's like, Psychic Horror, isn't it the same as a stun, essentially? Like, you're essentially stunned. You're just standing there, right? And it's like you're essentially stunned. Like, it can be broken by taking damage, but not if it's shadow damage. It's like on a Tuesday, like this is Diablo 4 all over again. It's like to doing frost damage on a Tuesday where the moon is high in the sky. Like, what is this shit, right? It's a fear. Just make it a fear. It's either a fear or a stun. It's not horror, okay? It's a fear or a stun. Like, it doesn't matter. So yeah, and the last point that he made is like tanks in arena, and in my opinion, it's like, yeah, you didn't have fun with tanks in arena, I get it. However, in my opinion, tanks are also players, and they should be allowed to play in arena. However, they should be balanced accordingly for arena, because tanks can bring certain utility that other, like DPS or healers cannot, or DPS, like melee DPS, range DPS, casters, and healers cannot. I think they're somewhere in between. Yes, they need to have like more survivability, but there should be there for the support role. In my opinion, tanks were not the issue. In my opinion, the 2v2 or 3v3 composition is more of an issue. So you can't, like, you don't have a room for a tank, essentially. It doesn't do enough damage and doesn't do enough healing. Like, what is he there for? It's like, the game is designed in such a way where it's like you need either extreme amount of burst.
Now that's a lot of damage!
Or extreme amount of healing to deal with the burst.
On waterproof tape, that's clearly the best way to patch, bond, seal, and repair.
And there's not much in between. That's where the tanks come in. So in my opinion, it's more the game design, not so much the tanks. And also you need to balance tanks specifically for how they would be in Arena. Okay? And I'm not saying Final Fantasy XIV did it perfectly. It has many issues, but in my opinion, the way Final Fantasy dealt with that problem was actually pretty good. Again, there were balance issues, but Warriors brought a lot of stuff. For example, Warriors in Final Fantasy XIV, PvP, they're tanks PvE and PvP, and they just bring a lot of CC, some AoE damage and stuff like that, but they're not great at like sitting on a target and killing it. That's what you have samurais, rogues, and dragoons for, right? Similar kind of idea. Again, this will require way too much work by Blizzard, so I'd never expect this to happen, but all I'm saying is, in my opinion, tanks are not the problem. In my opinion is the game design, and I think that's what we're really talking about here.
Spectacle and some sense of scale are so paramount in MMOs. Yeah, exactly. It's fucking awesome. It's like everybody riding up to Blackrock Mountain on their mounts, everybody getting their world buffs. I'm sorry, but this is much more interesting than the ending cinematic of Yggdrasil. That was cool. And I don't really care about, oh yeah, but it was really easy. Who cares? Like, what? Like, what are you talking about? Was it easy? Like, if you wanted something hard, go play Valorant.
Okay, so let's be real here. Anything was more interesting than the Yggdrasil cinematic, so I'm not even gonna talk about that. But in terms of spectacle, honestly, I'm not gonna lie. I don't think there has ever been spectacle in a raid environment in World of Warcraft. Ever. Maybe Ragnaros, maybe, but honestly, not really. You're in too close of an environment most of the time. You're either in a room, like it's never been really a spectacle. However, what was a spectacle was like riding up to, I would agree with that, like everybody riding and all that stuff. In my opinion, if you want spectacle in MMO, it has to be outdoor, right? I think Guild Wars 2 is doing spectacle fights a lot better in their meta events, specifically End of Dragons, right? Specifically End of Dragons. Specifically Dragon's End map. Okay, that's a spectacle fight. I think that one is way better. And like you build up to it, like the whole zone is made up for a spectacle fight. I think that's what you want. World bosses are kind of a spectacle, like especially the first few times and stuff like that. But I don't think you can ever make it in a raid environment. I really don't think raids are that great of a spectacle. I can't really agree on this point, but I do agree that MMOs need spectacle. I just don't think raid environments are for it. Anyways, let's move on to the disagreement section. Now that we're like half agreed, half disagreed on this one, I think it's a good time to flip it to the other side. So let's get on with it.
Like, the add-ons have gotten so complex in WoW that I think that they genuinely ruined the game. Like, this is like, how are you letting this happen? Like, you have these people. Think about it like this. I think that Liquid has a person, maybe it's Echo, it probably is both of them, have a person that they pay exclusively to make weak auras for their guild. If that wasn't a massive, tremendous advantage, they wouldn't be spending that money. How is this a problem? The reason why it's a problem is because the way it completely contrives the way that the development team has to make fights. How can you fuck it up this bad? Where everybody who's playing your game is reliant on like 7 different add-ons, and you're designing the game with those add-ons. Like, it's my position, I will say again, is that every single add-on should be against the rules. Unironically, Final Fantasy XIV does it right, and WoW should do the exact same thing. Every single add-on. And yes, that includes Bag-On. Yes, that includes Auctioneer. Yes, that includes everything. Weak auras, every single add-on should be completely disabled, and it should be against the terms of service to use it.
Bro, I don't know why he's going after Bagnon, or Bag-On, whatever. Bagnon is the one I used. LVUI is the one I used as well. I don't know why he's going after those. I understand the principle. However, overall I disagree. The whole point of his argument to begin with was that raids need to be easier, more accessible. If the raids are easy and accessible, you don't need add-ons for them. Therefore, having add-ons is not really a big issue. Now, when he says that's like, well, now the development teams has to make the fights harder to, because it's an arms race against add-ons. I don't agree. I don't think the dev team has to fight the add-on developers on the making the fights harder. Because again, the whole point is not to make the fights harder. You make it for people assuming that they don't have add-ons, and if people want to have add-ons, fuck it. Oh, they're gonna have an easier time doing an easy boss. Who gives a shit? Right, in my opinion, add-ons add a lot to the game, and let's be real, even Final Fantasy didn't allow for add-ons, but you would not get certain quality of life additions to Final Fantasy 14 if people didn't make add-ons to begin with, right? Add-ons are actually a great way for the game to develop in a way that the least heard of the people, of the players, to be heard. Okay? Hey, everyone is using Auctioneer. Why is that? Well, maybe because it's easier to find stuff in the auction house, to get stuff that you want, to play the auction house, which is another mini game that people have inside of World of Warcraft. And the only reason it's easier is because of stuff like Auctioneer and TSM. Though, again, you don't have to add everything. But they would never improve quality of life unless people had add-ons. Why do you think in Dragonflight they improved the UI so much? Well, because it was dated. Dude, they don't give a shit that it's dated. If it was the only option, it would never change. You know why it changed? Because for years you had stuff like LVUI and you had ZPearl and XPearl and all that stuff that like changed the UI. And they're like, you know what? People want this. We might as well give it to them, so because we don't want them to rely on add-ons. Add-ons are a great way for the game to improve, so I kind of disagree that Blizzard should remove all add-ons. Okay. And yeah, I don't think they should be against the rules. Right. Now, I understand the point of like the add-ons make the game too easy, but like, bro, if the game is easy to begin with, which is the original point of Asmongold's point, regardless, add-ons are not an issue. Because add-ons are a solution to a problem that the game has of the game being too hard. So we're gonna use add-ons to make it easier. If the game is not that hard, who gives a shit, right? And I want to talk about like why the raid is so hard, why you can have a very hard. Because I did mention earlier that there is room for hard, difficult content. We're gonna talk about that in my final thoughts about this video and just like overall state of WoW towards the end of the video. But yeah, I honestly don't agree with this point. I also don't agree that Final Fantasy 14 should disable all the add-ons. There is toxicity in add-ons, and there's also a lot of benefits in add-ons. In my opinion, they should be allowed. And if people are being toxic, this is similar to like Guild Wars 2. Is kind of like they don't really allow add-ons, but only if you talk about them. So the whole idea of, let's say, DPS meters, if you don't talk about it, if you don't shame people for having low DPS, stuff like that, then you don't get in trouble. And like, you're okay to have it, right? Similar things. Like, don't be toxic with the add-ons, and I don't think it's an issue.
Somebody asked this question. They said, how important is fantasy story, shared experience, and world building to raiding? Epic questlines add so much depth to make players care and want to raid. I think it's an undervalued aspect. It's everything, man. It's everything. You're totally right. You are 100% right. Like the old Scepter of the Shifting Sands questline, like everything like that, that's the real texture of the game. That's the real cool shit. Not this like loser bullshit that we have now. Legion killed it with that? Yeah, like what is this?
Now, to an extent, I want to agree with him here, but I really can't. Like, the Scepter of the Shifting Sand, in my opinion, was garbage. I'm sorry. I'm gonna get a lot of hate for it, but in my opinion, that was garbage. What are the most memorable, most interesting, probably the most participated in raids ever? Black Temple, ICC, Tomb of Sargeras, I think Nighthold to an extent as well, right? Like, compared to like what we thought the player amount was, obviously, right? I think the most participated raids in are by far the ones that just had a massive story, not a huge quest line behind them. I bet most people don't even know what the quest line was for ICC. Was there even really a quest line for Tomb of Sargeras? I know there was, like the whole island thing, the whole Broken Isle, whatever it was called, where you did the quest, then you had Cathedral Eternal Nights, and like the preparation for the raids. Like, bro, but like, let's be real, like, people just want to get into Tomb of Sargeras because it's Tomb of Sargeras, okay? The whole, like, that doesn't matter, right? I don't think anyone care about... I mean, okay. Yes, people care about Scepter of the Shifting Sands, but in terms of, like, its impact on raid participation, I doubt it. And again, very, very different times. Very different times. That's when a time when, like, people actually cared about what WoW was about, right? So I can't even, like, say too much about that. But in Classic, did people really care about the quest line to open the raid? They cared about the mount, they cared about the title. Like, they would have done that quest regardless of the raid. They would have done that raid regardless of the quest. I don't think the two meant anything to one another at all. Same with, like, the quest line to Naxxramas. Shit, I don't even know what the quest line was to get to Naxxramas. I know Naxxramas. I know the story to an extent about Naxxramas. Right? I think story is really important. I don't think the epic quests matter to the raid. I think epic quests are important. I doubt they matter to the raid at all. Unless they really present a story. And, like, let's be real, Scepter of the Shifting Sands, how much story did that really give you about Ahn'Qiraj? For, like, 95% of players, how much did that really give them? Oh, like the war with the bugs and the dragon. How much do you really know about Ahn'Qiraj, realistically, right? Very, very minimal, right? There's a lot of story that wasn't told that well inside of, what's it called? Inside of the quest line. Like, it is what it is. Most of the quest line was gather 1,000 of this, 1,000 of that, 2,000 of this. Like, not a fun questline. It doesn't even feel epic. It's like, oh, well, you need to bring everyone together. Like, I have a lot to say about that. Honestly, in my opinion, I think epic questlines do have space in WoW, and I think that you should have a few epic questlines, at least one per expansion. But in terms of their hype building for a raid, I strongly don't see that.
Should be 40-player raids. Bring them back. Bring them back. Remember you used to get all the boys together and do Molten Core and Classic? That shit was fun. That was awesome. It was cool seeing everybody there together. And fuck. Isn't that what matters? It's an MMO. It's an experience. You want to go for something challenging? Go play a real game. Holy shit. 40 players for big guilds should be... Absolutely, because if you made... Listen, here's what they need to do. Make the raids way fucking easier. Add 40-man raids again. Get rid of mythic raid lockouts that are it's a joke. I can't believe they still have that nowadays. Stop designing fights for the world first race. Make gear more fun to get. Give people a way to upgrade their gear and, like, continuously build for items. That's what they need to do. Like, this bullshit here, strict 20-man requirement, you would have the same problem if you had 10-man requirements. You know why? Because people are still going to quit. The problem isn't that there's a strict 20-man requirement. The problem is that there's a strict requirement for gameplay, and only 20 people can meet that requirement, and oftentimes you can't even get that. So then maybe make the requirements a little bit less strict, and then you can bring more people, and it can feel like an MMO rather than a scuffed esport that it never was meant to be. And it never will be. Nobody will ever take WoW seriously as an esport. Nobody will ever respect accomplishments that people have nowadays in WoW. Who the fuck cares? Like, who won the last MDI? Who won the last AWC? Nobody gives a fuck and nobody cares because the game is dead and it has no casual player base for anybody to really care about it. That's the problem. People cared about Wreckful because people cared about the game. People cared about somebody like, I'm trying to think of someone like Kungan because people cared about the game. That's the real reason. Everything else is all bullshit. And the reason why those top players back then were so revered is because there was a casual player base that existed underneath to support them and look up to them. And nowadays, that casual player base is gone because Blizzard has intentionally pushed them away. I think, I know this is my most unpopular WoW opinion, okay? 40-man raids are better than 20-man raids. But I hope you guys see my perspective at least, okay? I'm not saying you have to agree with me. But I think it would be cool and more fun to do that. And for me, that's the only thing that I really care about. I don't care about how hard it is. If I want to do something hard, I do it in real life. Like, what are we talking about? Like, it's not hard. It's a fucking video game. They programmed the video game to lose. You're really getting an ego over beating something that's programmed to lose? Get the fuck out of here. Are you 12?
And if you want to do 10, so that you got sustainability...
Imagine if you had twice as many slots. Because you had a 40-man raid. It'd be a lot easier to figure things out, right? For the roster. Yeah. Why not have a variable number of players? I actually disagree with the variable number of players. I think that's stupid. And I'll explain why. I like the idea that you need to have 25 or 40 people, and the reason why is that it makes you make concessions and invite the people that you might not have necessarily invited in the past. It makes it to where people are inherently less restrictive with how they invite because they need to meet a certain amount of player count. And so, I remember very clearly in ICC, there would be, there was this one time I was making a group for 25-man ICC. And there was this hunter who was like the third person who messaged me. And I kept ignoring him, and he kept messaging me. And we finally get all the way. I fill the entire raid up. I have 24 people. I can't fill the last slot. And I fucking invite him. And goddamn, I made the right call the first time not inviting him. The guy was fucking garbage. He was terrible. But you know what? He got into the raid. He did. He got it. It was Bodego. Remember Bodego? Yeah, exactly. Like, you bring in these people because you need to meet the slots. And this is just like, I think there's something that's kind of good about that.
Okay, there's a lot to unpack on this one. Now, some things I do agree on, but I'm not really going to focus on them because, nuance, ego of players and whatever, and it's sense of accomplishment. I think having a sense of accomplishment overall is not that bad of a thing. Holding it over others is bad. So to that point, it's kind of whatever. But anyways, let's go to the key points. Raiding is an experience. I agree. Raiding is an experience. However, in my opinion, 40 man is not much more of an experience than a 20 man. Especially when in a 40-man raid, 10 players out of those 40 can be dead in most cases, and the raid will still succeed. That's 25% of the raid is so why are they there? Then why is this not just a 30-man raid, right? Forming a raid shouldn't take as long as the raid itself, in my opinion, and obviously having more players is gonna increase the amount of time it takes to fill in a raid. This obviously includes world buffs, getting there, having your time wasted in the raid, and which is something that me and Asmongold both agree on. The amount of time being wasted in the raid should be removed, but this again has nothing to do between 40 and 20. This could be adjusted regardless. And that being said, the way raids are right now, with a mandatory 14 slots being taken for raid buffs, is not much better, obviously. So... And again, he makes a point where it's well, if you had more people, then, you're going to have more empty slots. There's another way to decrease the amount of mandatory slots. I don't think increasing the raid size is necessarily the best way. Now, is there room for a 40-man raid? I think there is. And honestly, I think those raids should be 1 to 2 boss fight raids. And even more honestly, guild-only raids. So you can only access these raids in a guild. But this will require, a lot more development out of the out of the dev team. I don't know how you would access this. You would have to form like a guild raid, and then your guild master or whoever the raid leader of the guild, and the game has to detect that 100% of the players are in the same guild, and then you teleport into that raid through like a special portal somewhere. I don't know how like the minuscule details of it, but I think it would be a lot cooler if you have a 40-man raid that is just a guild and it's only for 1-2 bosses. And like, what would be the rewards out of it? I don't know. Maybe cosmetic and maybe some guild buff specific thing. Maybe resources, like crafting resources for the guild craftsmen, whatever. I don't know. This is like a completely different game at this point. So like, I don't even know, but I think there is room. I don't know how you're going to implement it, but I think there is room for 40 mans, and honestly, probably looking for a group is the way to go with 40 mans. Anyways, regarding the casual players that revered famous players, I don't think that Blizzard pushed those players away. I don't really agree with this point, because now you just have a revered famous player everywhere you look. You have people running around with TTV in their name. You have people who compete in World First. No one ever heard about, okay? Like, can you name all the players who are on the Limit team? Aside from Max, can you name 19 other people? Fuck, can you name, technically they're like a team of 28, I believe. Can you name the other 27? You probably can't even name 10 of them. Okay, now I doubt this is about casual players being pushed away, but more like an oversaturation of people trying to be the special someone in this game. In short, as the great war chief once said,
times change.
And many people who are no longer children, similar to how they removed their Eminem posters, disposed of Bunny of the Month calendars, and got rid of their hidden Britney Spears album collections, they stopped putting people on a pedestal for video game accomplishments. Unless it's Faker, of course. And I don't even know if Asmongold knows who Faker is. Okay, now I do see his point about the 40-man raids being better. I disagree. And the main reason I disagree is because of how much effort it takes to find 40 people. In terms of design, 20 and 40 can be the same difficulty. Like, you just make mechanics for 20 instead of 40. I don't think you need to make the raid easier for 40 that you can't make the raid easier for 20. I don't think you need to make that raid that difficult at all. In terms of specific class buffs, I already talked about earlier, but basically multiple classes can bring a similar buff to the raid. 40-man raid will not be any more special than a 20-man raid of a similar difficulty, and it would at the very least be easier to communicate with less people. This is true. A 40-man Discord group sounds like outer chaos, where everyone has to shut up and only select few players will get to talk the whole time, and the rest will feel like outcasts. You already have small subgroups inside of a raid group that only talk to their select 3 or 4 people about the other 17 to 17 people, and don't really talk to the others. Imagine this in a 40-man environment. So it's like calling this a social environment, stuff like that. No, you just create small subgroups of people inside of that 40-man. Most people will not know the other 30 people in the raid. They'll know like the raid leader, maybe a specific role leader, maybe if the GM is there but he's not the raid leader, then you know the GM. Then you have the 3 or 4 people you actually get along with that you only talk to them in whispers or whatever, or like you have your own group chat. You don't know the rest. And this is already true for 20 men. So like in 40 men, like it's not gonna be much different. Now overall, I see more negatives than positives in a 40 versus 20 sized raid. And all the reasons that made 40 men so great before, like difficulty, can be adjusted to a 20-person roster. Though, if I was completely honest, I think limited flex raids are just as good, if not better. But instead of like true flex, I would say strict flex. It would go basically in increments of like, let's say 20, 25, 30, 35, 40. If you really want to go that way. So it's like if you have 21 people, you will need to find 4 more people, because it's once you have more than 20, it will fit with the 25 person, right? Obviously, I'm just making the increments out of my ass right now, but you get the point. I think this is too much to ask of the balance team. So it's not like this is not a hill I'm gonna die on for such a small benefit to the game. This is like way down the road after they fix a slew of other issues. Now this would also solve the Asmongold's problem that he had, where he needed to take the hunter into the raid. But honestly, like, okay, let's be real about this for a second, okay? If that hunter was so bad at the game, does it even matter that you invited him to fill in that slot? Did he really make the difference between 24 to 25? Did you need to have 25 slots? So I think you could have done it with 24, just probably maybe even easier. Also, an environment that would take quite a good amount of time, where the person who is bad at the game is just a warm body to fill in arbitrary slots, is kind of like, I don't know. It's not like, I have this thing where I really don't like being carried. I don't like carrying, especially in an environment that not only you need some preparations to get into, like you need certain gear, you needed to put some effort, maybe research the bosses, right? This is obviously how it is now. If you make it easier, I think people would still want to get some gear before and stuff like that. But also, like, it's an environment where it takes a very long amount of time to finish. Like, raids are not like a 10-minute endeavor, right? It's a few hours, and it's like, for those few hours, this hunter is completely fucking useless. Like, why is he there? Like, you know? And if there was ever a good argument for LFR, a 40-man rating for people like that hunter, that would be it. Now, before you think I'm gatekeeping, in a sense, you would be right. I am gatekeeping on this one. Right? And I think there is a healthy amount of gatekeeping that should exist. The example of that hunter is just an indication that he doesn't care about the content as much as the people who were doing it to begin with. And isn't a raid supposed to be composed of like-minded individuals, right? Since people already are thinking about this, like, oh, like, you know, me and the boys, 40 of us going to kill this big fucking dragon, like the point that Asmongold made. But that means all of the boys are on the same mindset. They want to go there and they want to kill this massive dragon. This hunter clearly doesn't give a shit, right? He didn't put in any effort. And as Asmongold said, he was garbage, right? He was straight up garbage. Like, he was fucking useless. Like, why is he there? And people who want to down bosses should invite people who have a similar mindset. People who just want to chill, talk smack, and fight some big dudes. That's the people they should invite, right? You just want to chill and talk smack and, like, fight big, smelly monsters, then that's the people you want to hang out with. Why are you going into a run that's like people who want to kill bosses, who want to get shit done like in the least amount of time? This is not your environment. Alright, so final thoughts. The raiding scene in WoW has many issues. I don't think 40 man is gonna be a solution for it. I think making the raids easier, I think the overall is good. I think not caring that there are add-ons, I think that is totally fine, because again, we are not trying to make the raids harder anyways. Now, is there room for harder content? Yes, in my opinion, both Mythic Plus and raiding have a lot of room for harder content. However, that shouldn't be something that the casual player should worry about. Okay, I'm not going to get into Mythic Plus, that's a whole other monster, but in terms of raiding, it's simple. Mythic raiding, make it cosmetic. Decrease the amount of item levels between each raid tier. Okay? Normal and heroic, reward gear. LFR, sure, reward gear as well. Because they're not going to remove LFR, normal, heroic, and mythic. They're not going to remove it. But they can easily make mythic have only cosmetic rewards. You can remove all the trash, make it a boss rush, whatever you want to call it. Boss after boss after boss. Respawn at boss. For all I care, you can just spawn at the boss that you choose. 100% cosmetic reward, so it's like you kill the boss, you get the cosmetic. Oh, it's gonna make people buy. I don't care. Stop caring about degenerates, okay? If people want to buy a carry for a mythic boss, I don't care. Go for it, okay? Again, most people are not gonna do it, so whatever. The cosmetics will have a limited time. Right, while the raid is available, that is the only time. While the raid is the raid of the patch, that is the only time you can get these cosmetics. Similar to Arena, Okay, arena, if you're a gladiator, whatever, rival, I don't know where the, you know, things are, what the premise is, but like you can get a special armor, right? Make it actually special, make it like the same armor from heroic, but give it like that mythic treatment, the colors, like the more robust, all that shit, make it more exciting. One, it will add a lot of importance to transmogs again. Okay, it's a limited time item that you can only get if you played during this time, right? And after that, even though people can access mythic rating after the fact, they will not be able to get the same cosmetic. It can either be a reduced cosmetic, can be the heroic like recolor or something like that, but it cannot be the same depth of cosmetic as it was when mythic was current. Okay, and yeah, it's pretty much, you know, I think I covered all my other opinions as a whole. I honestly I agree with Asmongold on a lot of things, as you probably saw from the agreement thing, and it's actually pretty rare for me to disagree with Asmongold. I'm not gonna lie, it is pretty rare. I do like his takes a lot of the time, but in this time, I actually just don't agree with him on, well, the specifics that I talked about. However, one thing I really do agree with Asmongold about is in this final message. And honestly, this is probably the most important thing he said this whole video. And this is probably the only thing that should really matter in this whole video. I'll leave it to him, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.
At PoE? What? Made me soft? Why would I want to be hard in a video game? It's just a game. Who cares? How old are you? Like, what? It's just a game. Like, who cares? Like, what's wrong with you? Yeah, you want to be hard? Yeah, what is this? Like, guys, and this is, I think this is what happens a lot with like I think this has been a lot of one game Andes things. Is that a lot of one game Andes get hyper fixated on being good at their game. They're like very, very focused on like, I want to be good at my game, and they view being good at their game as a genuine accomplishment. I'm gonna be honest, guys. Nobody gives a fuck if you're good at WoW. Nobody cares. It will never matter, and it will never amount to anything. It's the same as League of Legends or Valorant or any of these other games. However good you think you are at the game, you're not good enough to play at a competitive level, probably. And if you are, then go do that, then it does matter. But otherwise, it really doesn't. It really doesn't make a big difference. Like, nobody's ever going to care. It's never going to mean anything. There's never going to be like a light at the end of the tunnel where, oh, well, all of my hard work paid off. It's never going to pay off. It's never going to matter. At least I'm good at something. Well, being good at something that doesn't matter isn't really that much better than being good at nothing, is there? You're saying this from experience? Yeah, of course. Like, I would say that all of the time that I've spent trying to be good at games hasn't really given me any sort of real reward, like, ever.